Hey guys, hey, it's Matthew. I wanted to record this brief video, kind of just walking you through the process of taking an image that you'd like to use for a painting and sort of running it through some digital software to sort of understand things. Um, I guess really proportionally, but also, going back to the idea of using value to make some decisions when you're painting. So the first thing you have to do is you have to decide, okay, which photograph would I like to use? And what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to select a photograph by one of my previous students, which I thought was really just, a fantastic image for him to work with. The reason why he chose this image was because, this person had passed away and he was important to this student and he wanted to sort of do a painting that was in memoriam and in memory of this gentleman. And so the real truth is the photograph isn't that great because it's a little bit blurry, okay? That's not the end of the world because this is really just a guide and you know, we have enough information here to work with, but I would advise when you guys are choosing an image to work with that I don't know, it's like this one is really up close. Like you can see the lines in his face, you can see the eyes, you can see his beard, but the real problem is it's just not really in very good focus. And so what I want you guys to be doing in this class, just kind of going back um, to some of these details on the project prompt, I want you to be working hopefully on a 16 by 20 inch pre-stretched canvas, okay? And these pre-stretched canvases are really good quality. We're living in an age, I mean, we could stretch our own canvases, but the real truth is I think I'd prefer that we were moving a little bit more quickly in this class and focusing on the application of paint and actually creating the work. And so I use pre-stretched canvases in my own art practice. If I were to make something really, really large or sort of abnormal, I would probably think about pre-stretching a cam or stretching a canvas on my own. But for the time being, I've found that the ones that you can pick up at Hobby Lobby or Michael's work pretty nicely, okay? So 16 by 20, I wanted to go here and just kind of remind you guys that the dimensions are 16 by 20. If you decide to go a little bit larger, it's going to be a little bit of a pickle for you because you're going to have to change the template. And I can help you with that, but just kind of keep in mind that the template is set up for 16 by 20 inches. Okay? So we have this photograph. And the first thing we need to do is we need to crop it to 16 by 20. And so I've opened up Photoshop. I've opened up the image in Photoshop. And up in the top left-hand corner, I'm just going to type 16 and then 20. Okay. And it looks like it's already pretty much in that aspect ratio. And by the way, it's not going to crop things down to like 16 or 20 inches. If you just leave the increments blank, it'll crop it to that aspect ratio, okay, which means it's not going to reduce the file size of the image. And so I don't really need to do anything for this particular photograph. But the next step, if I were to crop this, is I would, like maybe like make some adjustments and grab some of these handles and move them around. In fact, for this demo, I think I'm going to do that. So I'm going to actually make this image a little bit tighter just for the purpose of this demo. But you can make decisions at this point about, I mean, you're essentially laying out the composition of your painting and deciding how you want the figure or the head or the eyes to sit on the canvas. You can kind of rotate things, and this is a very, very important step because it's going to define how the content will sit on the canvas, okay? And you can grab these handles again and you can crop in, you can crop out. You can grab this, this top right hand edge, and we're going to be doing this in the digital classroom together. So you'll have some hands-on experience with this process. Pretty simple. Okay, so I did zoom in a little bit on the portrait or the figure or the face so I can get a real nice clear image. And then up here there's this checkbox. Just go ahead and click that. Okay, now we've got that clicked, and then I'm going to save as because I do not want to overwrite this original image. So, and I'm just going to call it 16-20, and I'm going to put it directly in the students folder, where it was living, so that I know where to find it later. Click save. Now, if I go back to that folder, I named it 16 by 20 JPEG. Open this up, and you can see here's the preview. All right. Now we're not done yet because now we're going to run this image through Illustrator. But there's actually one other thing I want to do, guys. I want to have a color image of this photograph, and I also want to have a black and white image of this photograph because we're going to be thinking about value in this class and how you can sort of define colors to sort of fit into a value system for dark shades and for lighter shades, or dark tones or lighter tones. So now I'm going to go back to Photoshop. I'm using the same exact image. I haven't changed it at all. And the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to Image in the menu of Photoshop, and then I'm going to go to Mode, and then I'm going to go to Grayscale. And basically what that is going to do is it's going to discard all of the color information, okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save as again. I'm not going to just hit Command S save. I'm going to save as because I don't want to overwrite the original. And then I'm going to change the file name to maybe add dash BW so I know which one is which. Okay. So now if I go back to my file folder, I've got color image, and then I've got a black and white image. Okay. Both exactly the same. Both are going to be useful for this process, okay? You got to trust me on that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to go back, and I've given you guys a template, and you need to um, take the template and take your photo. I mean, you're going to be creating a project folder. I'll be walking you through this in the classroom, but the next step is you want to open the template, and then you want to come up here to File, Place, okay? And now I'm going to navigate to that students folder. And it's really good to be organized with this stuff so that you can find things later. So student work, that's under project one. Whoops, actually it's project three, my mistake. There it is. So let's start with the color image. So select it, and then you have this option to place. Go ahead and click place, and then you're going to see this icon. When you see this icon, go ahead and just kind of click with your mouse. Now the problem is, what I would like to do, or what I would prefer to do, is I would like to have the grid on a separate layer compared to the image. Okay, and right now they're both on the same layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the image, and then I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard, and I'm going to redo that operation. Except this time I'm going to lock that layer, going to rename this layer grid. And then I'm going to add a new layer by clicking this little plus sign down here. Call this one color photo. Okay. And then I'm going to create another layer for BW photo. Okay, so I'm going to gently select this layer that's BW photo, and I'm going to do the same thing. Go to File, Place. There's the BW image, the black and white image. There we go. And you can see it's on that layer because of that little icon that's green right there. And then also the image is sort of it's outlined in that same or similar color. So, but as you can see, the aspect ratio is correct, but the image is a little bit smaller. than the canvas. And that's okay because the aspect ratio is correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put this in the corner there. And by the way, if you come up here to view, make sure snap to grid is off. Make sure all of these guys are off and make sure smart guides is on. Okay. When you have smart guides, you get these really nice kind of magenta sort of clues when you're moving things around. And so it'll automatically snap into the far corner when you're moving that image. And also, I want you to keep in mind that the grid layer has been locked, so I can no longer move any of this information. Okay? All right. So, but I have to make this image a little bit bigger. So gently select it, and then with your left pinky, hold Shift, and then expand it down into this corner. Okay? If you don't hold Shift with your pinky while you're doing this, you'll accidentally distort your image. So, but look what happens if I just hold Shift with my pinky, then things will expand um, without distortion. Okay. So now we have that one placed. Let's lock it down temporarily, and then let's move to the color photo layer. Okay. Go to File, Place, navigate to your folder where you have your images and all your good stuff. Here's 16 by 20. Place it. That's interesting. Like the black and white image is on top of the color one, but see, on the layers palette, we can just make the black and white layer go away temporarily. And then we can do the same thing with the color layer. Hold Shift, make it the right size. Okay. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be tracing essentially these images so that we can have a better understanding of value and we can assign a color on our palette to a value that we observe here digitally. Okay, so basically this is a tool or a roadmap to completing our oil painting accurately. Okay. In addition, we can use this to sketch out the initial photo painting as well on the canvas. Okay, so there are a number of ways that this is really, really useful. And by the way, this grid is each one of these little squares is 1 inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So it correlates exactly to the pre-stretched canvas that you've purchased from Michaels. And those things are really spot on. I would say like their dimensions are quite accurate. That's the other reason why I like the ones that you can just pick up from an art shop or store. Okay, so let's work with the black and white one first. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to unlock that layer. Notice how I can make the colored layer go away. You can sort of manipulate these layers and lock all of them. So, but for the time being, I want to bring the black and white layer back and I want to unlock that layer. And the next thing I'm going to want to do, actually, and I like to, instead of just destroying assets, I like to duplicate assets. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the BW photo layer and I'm going to drag it down here to the plus sign. Okay. And if you're having trouble seeing things or if you need a little bit more room, you can take this palette and you can kind of stretch it down because we're going to be making more layers. This is like the crucial first step, by the way, to like the way that I personally approach painting and working on canvas because I have a digital background and I think that these digital tools can be quite useful even when you're doing traditional processes on canvas, like working with burnt sienna and doing an underpainting and, sketching with graphite. It's really nice to have these to sort of just look at, okay? And so, okay, we've got this black and white photo layer, and then what we've done is we've duplicated it. So we've made a copy. So now I'm going to call this one BW Photo 6. Okay. And then the next, I'm actually going to drag this again down into the plus sign. And then I'm going to rename this layer dash 12. Let's go with 12 this time instead of 16. Usually I'll do a 16 because it's uh, the process is kind of predefined and it's a little bit easier. But I think for this class, 12 is going to be a little bit better. So 6 and then 12. And you'll see why we're going to have 2 here in a second. Okay? The last thing I want to do is I want to actually duplicate this one more time. I know this is getting a little bit crazy, but now I'm going to call this one just dash line. Okay? So this is pretty cool. Like we have all these options, that are being developed. And I also I think it's always really handy to have the original photo as well. Okay, and make sure that one gets locked. So we can bring that back. We're kind of, setting up all this stuff. So now let's turn this image into a line sort of image that could be helpful for sketching your image with graphite or charcoal onto the canvas. Okay, so let's see. Select, image trace, and look, there's an option for line art. Okay. And in this particular circumstance, it didn't work very well. In fact, it worked horribly. Um, so in this this particular circumstance, I would advise the student to just simply work from the photograph, okay, and kind of draw things in. So for some reason, that's not going to work with this image. Sometimes things happen. You just you have to roll with the punches, folks. Okay. Let's hope for better, when we're tracing this one. So let's come up here. Let's select this layer. This is BW Photo 6. Turn it on. And now let's come up here to, we have to unlock that layer, then select the image. When you select the image, you see this, the icons kind of pop up and change up here. Go to the drop down, and then we can do a 6-color trace. Okay. Now look at that. So the software, what it just did was it basically distilled this image into a variety of different values and 6 total. So let's imagine that you're working uh, on your palette. You could mix up 6 different shades of color or even just black and white or monochromatic material, and then you could apply that to your canvas. Okay. And you could even take it a step further and you could deconstruct these so that you can see them separately on each layer. That is getting a little bit complicated, but I don't mind going through that with you as well. But let's consider that a win. I think that one worked out really well. Okay. And then let's make it go away for a moment. Now let's try the 12 trace that we want to attack. So same image, select. Here's the drop down. And by the way, there's 3, 6, and 16. That's not going to work. Okay. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go up to Window and then go to Image Trace right here. That'll pop up this dialog box. Okay. And then we want to go to Color. And then we want to plug in 12 here. Okay. Let's see how this goes. Ready? Boom. There we go. So in this circumstance, if you want your image to have a broader kind of value system, you can use 12. That gets a little bit complicated, like actually, that's why I like to do the 6 and the 12 so that you folks can kind of have some options. I actually think that working with the 6 is plenty. And then maybe if you really want to look at the black and white photo or like, this one for additional reference, I think that wouldn't be a bad idea. But in my opinion, this is plenty to get started. And then you would use the black and white photo to kind of sketch things out. And you can sort of, again, you can map out these beautiful sort of contour lines. You don't want this to be very complicated. You're just trying to sketch out or block in the general sort of place where like the collar starts and where the ear is and You just want the general placement of things. And we're starting general and then we're going to get specific as we develop the painting, okay? So we've done the black and white, I think, successfully. Unfortunately, that particular image, because it's a little bit maybe it's because it's not in focus. That was probably part of it. But that line image really failed. But just for my own curiosity, I want to look at the line image that came out previously. So somehow, when I was working with the student, this was the line image that had happened before. Yeah, and it came out. I don't know, I could doctor that a little bit more, but because I'm trying to go through this tutorial a little bit more quickly, so that's why I thought I would just show you. This is an example of sort of like these contour lines that can really help you look at that. Like here's that ear, right? And here's like the forehead. And a lot of this is less useful information, but again, we're just trying to generally figure out how does the head fit on the page? Where does the collar start? How do the shoulders kind of sit? That kind of thing. I've noticed that students sometimes spend a little too much time like thinking that they need to be extremely detailed with this, and it's just not the case. In this particular class, I want one painting done every single week, which means you do need to sort of be aware of time management. You got to move quickly, okay? Okay. So speaking of moving quickly, let's move on. So I'm gonna make the black and white photo image go away, and I'm gonna do the same thing, except I'm not gonna bother with the line layer, but I'm gonna duplicate it twice for 6 and 12, but I'm gonna use the colored photo, okay? So dupe once, dupe again. -6. It's really important that you're organized with these layers. Otherwise, it can become, a little bit cumbersome. And I'm going to go with 12 again. And you can actually stretch this out a little bit too so that you can see all your words properly. So like look at this real nice system. By the way, the grid layer is at the top because we want that on top of everything else. If I were to bring that down here and then turn on one of those layers, it would be obscured. And so we don't want that. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to lock that one, make sure it's off. Now let's start with color photo 6, turn it on, unlock it, select it, go up here to image trace. Here's the drop down, 6 colors. Let's see how that works. That's pretty useful. I like that. Okay. And now let's try the next one, 12. Unlock it, select it. Remember, 12 isn't here. I could go 16, but that's a little bit too complicated if you ask me. You guys, it's important to kind of like look at the results and see what's best for your circumstance. And in this circumstance, I think 16 is too much. So that's why I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say I want it to be color. And then I want to limit it to 12 colors. And then click trace. Nice. Okay, so here's the original color photo. Here's the color photo with 6 values. And here's the color photo with 12 values. All right. And then again, here's the black and white photo with 12 and then with 6. So if this had worked out successfully, the line trace, then I would have exported that separately as well. So, but in my circumstance today, it didn't work. But in the classroom, we will be attempting to do that, okay? So now it's time to export some things because essentially you want these, your phone is not going to read an Illustrator file, so you need to export some JPEGs so that you can sort of use this as reference on your iPad or your desktop, or excuse me, your laptop computer, or your phone, whatever it is that you want to use. I would advise that if you've got something with a bigger screen, it's going to be just a little bit easier, because what happens is, you kind of sometimes get lost in all of these little 1 inch increments when you're kind of zooming in with your finger, back and forth. Okay. So just keep that in mind. But these are great resources. Okay. So I'm going to start exporting things. And again, we want the grid on top. So the first thing I want is the BW Photo 6. So turn that on and then come here to File, Export As. Here's something that's very, very important. Click Use Artboards. And I'm just going to call this BW6. Export. And notice how I also did a PNG. And we don't need a 300 PPI or DPI PNG. I would suggest that we just go screen 72 PPI or DPI. Okay, that's enough for this circumstance. And then we're just going to repeat the process, except turning off that layer and turning on this layer. And we're going to call this one BW12. So File, Export As, PNG, make sure Use Artboards is on, BW12, export. I think just having the photograph itself with the grid on top is very, very useful. So File, Export As, BW Photo. And it's by default always 72 PPI, by the way, but that's really important. Okay, now let's go down here and let's do color 12. File, Export As, color 12. File, Export As, color dash 6. File, Export As, color dash photo. There we go. Now let's go back and just kind of take a look and see how things worked out. Here we go. So those are the original images. I want to confirm that these went to the right location. And actually, they went to an alternative location. So you got to be very mindful of like where you're saving these things. Thankfully, I know where they are. So I'm going to sort of move some things around really quickly. But this is a good learning moment. Just, to be aware of where you're sending your files so that you can find them later. Okay, folks? Because you're going to want to email these to yourself so that you can reference them. So courses, we're going into my archive here, and I sent it to assets. So there it is right there. But I'm going to create a separate folder, and I'm going to call it tutorial. Okay. And there's BW6, BW12. I mean, it's all right there. Okay. There we go. So now everything is together so that we can find it really easily. BW6, BW12, BW photo, color 6, And by the way, I'm just going to zoom in on one of these so that you can kind of see, you can just observe how the grid can be useful just for general layout. I mean, right now it's kind of like a digital painting, right? And we're going to be sort of using this as a tool moving forward. Not to copy, it's not really like the reason for this, but it's certainly a great guide, okay, to establish accurate proportion, especially when you're laying out um, the drawing. But the reason why we wanted to have a black and white version was so that we can see a little bit more clearly this idea of value. And by the way, I mean, I could continue to extract this. Um, I could create 5 additional layers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is something else. So this is like sort of something extra that I'd like to show you guys if you want to take this step, which can be really, really useful. So darkest, if you really want to establish value, really this one's the lightest or will be the lightest layer. But I'm going to put that in there just to remind myself. Okay, so essentially I'm going to unlock this layer. And right now, all of these vectors are grouped, but I can ungroup them by selecting the image, first of all, then come up here and click Expand, and then come up here to Object, Ungroup All, until you can't ungroup anymore. And now this is a little bit more advanced, but if you guys want to take on this challenge, great, and I'm around if you want to ask a question. But as far as I can tell, this is the darkest dark. So select one of them, and I can select the rest of them in this image by coming up here to select, same fill color. Notice how everything is highlighted here. Just drag this icon up here to this darkest layer. Lock the layer. Now turn it off. What's the next darkest? I think it's this one. Select, same fill color. Drag it up here to layer 12, which is like the next darkest. Lock it. Okay. Next darkest layer is this one. Select, same fill color. Lock it. Turn it off. So I'm just kind of like basically, it's kind of like peeling back the orange, right? Select, same fill. I mean, I think 6 tones is plenty to work with, especially if you're thinking about an underpainting. So if you were to use these, like this process to like, map out a general underpainting after you've done a sketch, and then you look at maybe the photograph or the more complicated 12 trace when you're starting to think about color, right? Um, okay, so we're not quite done yet. There's one more layer. Select, same fill. Okay, and then we just have the lightest light. That's all that remains. So that's your lightest light. That's your second lightest light, and so on. Now, here's the other cool thing. You could export these separately. So I could actually just export my darkest layer. So File, Export as, PNG, use artboards as on. I want to send it to the right place this time. Project 3, Students folder, Tutorial. I'm going to create a new folder within that folder. I'm going to call this Value. Okay, and I'm going to call this one 6. Export as 5. export as 4, export as 3, export as 2, and finally export as 1. Now, it's so amazing. Like we're basically like extracting or deconstructing, this value system that's associated with this painting to better understand it, as we're proceeding through this painterly process. And I think it's fantastic to sort of be able to use technology, for this sort of thing. So the next thing that I would do, honestly, is I would email these things to yourself and put them in a safe place on your device so that for the next few days you can reference these things. And by the way, we left the grid on when we were even like doing these value exports, right? And it may not, I mean, you can kind of see the face, you can see his eyes and the eyebrows, and you can see some general things. I mean, this is really, you can block out like, like some colors here. Now, well, I think that this is most valuable though when you're thinking about your underpainting. I mean, clearly, because the underpainting is monochromatic and it's all about just value, and a dark burnt sienna compared to a light burnt sienna. And the reason we're going through these paintings so quickly is because I don't want you guys overthinking things too much. This is a class where you're learning by doing quite a bit. And if you happen to fail and like, mess things up, well, it's not the end of the world because it's just not the end of the world. And you're gonna learn, by making a few mistakes. But you just have to trust this process and enjoy it. Okay. I think that's good for now. Thanks, guys. Bye.